We are live.
WebEx Assistant is enabled to save audio highlights.
Okay, I'm here for those of you that were looking for me. This is Allison.
Thank you, Allison. Chairman Miller, are you ready for the roll call?
Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Blanton?
Present.
Dr. Bullock?
Present.
Dr. Dempsey?
Present.
Dr. Fleming?
Present.
Ms. Janeski? Dr. Graham?
Present.
Dr. Houston? Dr. Locklear?
Present.
Dr. Marr?
Present.
Dr. Miller?
Present.
Dr. Penfield?
Present.
Superintendent Truitt?
Here.
Ms. Floyd?
Present.
Dr. Holland?
Present.
Dr. Weddington? Dr. Wood?
Present.
Mr. Smith?
Present.
Mr. Patton? We have quorum.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Evans. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome commission members, advisors, staff, on-site visitors, and online listeners to the March 10, 2022 monthly meeting of the North Carolina Professional Educator Preparation and Standards Commission. This commission develops and recommends to the State Board of Education rules related to all aspects of licensure and educator preparation programs. My name is Patrick Miller, and I'm the chairman of the Professional Educator Preparation and Standards Commission. I now call this meeting to order. Our agenda and materials are available online through the DPI website, www.ncpublicschools.org, on the SBE meetings link. The meeting is also audio streamed through a link located at the bottom of the eBoard agenda. I will now read the ethics statement that is required of us. Commission members are reminded that it is our duty to avoid conflicts of interest and the appearance of conflicts of interest as we handle the work of this commission. Does any member of the commission know of any conflict of interest or any appearance of conflict with respect to any matters coming before us at this meeting? If so, please state them for the record. If during the meeting you become aware of an actual or apparent conflict of interest, please bring the matter to the attention of the chair. It will then be your duty to abstain from participating in discussion on the matter and from voting on the matter. And before we go any farther in the agenda, I'd like to recognize Superintendent Truitt for a quick introduction. Superintendent Truitt.
Thank you so much, Dr. Miller. The legislature in the last budget has given the Department of Public Instruction a position to begin to oversee Teach NC, which previously has sat at Best NC. So Teach NC, which is part of the larger Teach.org, has provided the state with a very intentional way of recruiting teachers, including teachers of color. And so we're really happy that this work is moving to the Department of Public Instruction. And I'm thrilled to introduce Dr. Jason Caldwell to you all. Jason, if you could just come on camera for a minute. Jason will be part of the Office of Equity led by Dr. Catherine Edmonds. And Jason and I have worked together in the past, and I cannot think of anyone better to lead this work. And his new title will be Director, Teach NC, and Educator Recruitment Partnership. So he will not only be overseeing Teach NC, but he will also be leading the work around partnerships with community colleges, with the 2+2, and of course, looking at all efforts across the state to both diversify and increase our teacher pipeline. So thank you so much, Chairman Miller.
Thank you. And Welcome aboard, Jason. Commission members, you have had an opportunity to review the proposed agenda for today's meeting. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda for the March 10, 2022 meeting?
So moved. This is Van.
Thanks, Van. Have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second, Anthony Graham.
Thank you, Dr. Graham. We have a motion and a second to approve the agenda for today's meeting. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, those in favor of approval, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion is approved. Thank you. The minutes from our previous commission meeting on February 10th, 2022 have been prepared and made available to you. Do I have a motion to approve these minutes?
Motion approved.
Thanks. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second, Chris.
Thanks, Chris. We have a motion and a second to approve the February 10th, 2022 minutes. Is there any further discussion?
Chairman Miller. Chairman Miller, sorry, this is Randy.
Uh-huh.
I do have one point I'd like to bring to the commission on this that I just noticed. Under the discussion of point 2, where we had items for discussion and action, where we talked about the principal licensure subcommittee, in that top paragraph under point 2, it states require an MSA or an MA in another field. And if the MA is in another field, etc. I think the intention was to say masters, not specific to the MA. And I wouldn't want there to be confusion that the subcommittee was being specific to an MA versus, for example, an MS or any other masters.
So just instead of putting initials, write the word masters. Is that your suggestion?
Masters.
Dr. Evans,
Yes,
can
sir.
you make that change for us, please?
Yes. Yes, definitely.
All right. So with that correction of changing MA to the word masters, do we have a motion to approve the amended minutes?
So moved.
I make a motion we approve, Chris.
All right. Thanks. And do we have a second?
Second, Wesley.
All right, thanks. We have a motion and a second to approve the amended minutes. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, those in favor of approval, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? The minutes have been approved. Thank you. Now, Doctors Evans, Tomberlin, and Syberg, along with Andy Baxter, will present the NCDPI and State Board updates.
Good morning, everyone. I have 3 policy amendment updates. The first one is LICN 002, and this had to do with North Carolina pre-K teachers and non-public settings. And what was done here was to update what non-public meant and also update the type of license that they would be issued. Since lateral entry has sunsetted, will officially sunset completely on June 30th, 2022. It has been replaced with the residency license instead. And that went for action, and that was approved unanimously by the State Board of Education in March. And then there's LICN 006, and this had to do with experience credit for MSA interns and the graduate level salary. And that was for discussion, so it will go for action during the April board meeting. And then LICN 001 was also up for discussion, and that was focusing on the endorsement updates within the licensure areas, and then lifetime license update as it pertains to a statute update. And both of those are will go for action as well. That policy in particular will also go for action in April during the state board meeting. And next, I'll hand it over to Dr. Syberg, who will give an update around the licensure requirements for school administrators.
Thank you. So the work around the principal expectations is a continuation of several months worth of work. Long story short, we found some challenges in how the state was meeting, and in some cases not meeting, expectations that were outlined in 115C-284 around principal preparation, specifically regarding licensure exam, MSA requirement, defining the year-long internship, and having classroom teaching experience in terms of being in compliance with the law. So a couple of months ago, we collected information from three groups. One was NCACTI, which is a organization that supports universities and educator preparation programs that do educator preparation, essentially start the pipeline. We heard from them. We also heard from the Teacher Recruitment and Retention Task Force, which is an entity here within the department where we hear from stakeholders from across the state. And the third was the Principal Advisory Group led by Tabari Wallace. So we collected that information. That information was presented to the board last month. And then we also gave that information to a subcommittee here with Pepsi. That subcommittee made a series of recommendations, which you all saw last month. And that is what I brought to the board for additional consideration this month. So long story short, the board has now heard from Pepsi and these three associated groups, and they are in the process of considering those recommendations and will be weighing in on how they would like to proceed, if they would like to proceed with any changes to 284 in terms of recommendations to the lawmakers. Again, this is not to adjust by means of policy. This would be formally asking a request to the lawmakers to make adjustments to 284 and so ultimately to try and deal with the fact that the 284 requirements will be in play as of September 1st of 2022. So stay tuned. We'll give you some more information next month after the next board meeting when the board weighs in on how it would like to proceed. Any questions about that?
Anyone have any questions for Dr. Seiberg? All right. Thanks, Dr. Seiberg. Is EPP performance reporting next?
I believe it is. Kim, is that what we have next on the agenda?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so we also presented quickly to the board, we presented our annual report on educator preparation program outcomes. It's basically a series of 2 reporting obligations in the state. They're listed there on your screen. Essentially, we have to do annual performance reports as well as report cards. You can think of the performance reports as all the data we can possibly share related to the pipeline by EPP. And then the report cards are sort of a summation of that. And we've been able to adjust those performance report cards using some digital technology, which our colleague Andy Baxter is going to share with you in just a minute. The links are provided in the PowerPoint so that you can go to where the reports and the report cards are nested on our website. And you can also see the dashboards we're going to go over in just a second. Can you go to the next slide, Kim? Essentially, we framed this really quickly to the board. We framed it in the work as in terms of an overall perspective of what's going on within the pipeline. We do this annually when we share the reports. We also sort of share state level findings. We divided this up into essentially trying to address three questions. What does the new data show about the teacher pipeline? What can we learn from the state trends on key metrics of EPPs? and where can we go to learn some more information. So let me hand it over for Tom for just a quick overview of some findings for the pipeline.
Thanks, Dr. Seiberg. So this is Tom Tomberlin, Director of Educator Recruitment and Support at NCDPI. So this first slide shows us the candidate pipeline, and that is on the traditional route. So one of the things we're interested in is what does the pipeline look like from admission to a traditional educator prep program to actually entering the classroom and persisting in the classroom. And you can see here we've kind of conducted like what we would call a survival analysis, like how do those folks move from the admission into the classroom, and then ultimately how does their performance manifest in the classroom. And so you can see that of all those admitted in this period between 2013 and 16, 78% of them completed, and then of that original total, 54% of them taught within 3 years. So this is the first area that I would point to for this commission, is to look at that 46% of our folks that are admitted, 22% of them do not complete the program, and then another 24% don't enter the classroom. And so this is work for the agency to focus on how do we kind of shore up these leaks in the pipeline, because as we all know, this is the traditional route is the best route for developing teachers that are effective and persist in the profession. And so we want to make sure that we're addressing those problems where we can of getting teachers moving from enrollment into the classroom. And then it goes on to show how many of them taught for 3 years, and then the effectiveness of those teachers. And so this is just to help us understand how teachers are entering the pipeline through the traditional route. Next.
Hey, Tom, this is Van. Can I ask just to make sure I'm interpreting this correctly?
Sure.
So all the percentages go back to the 14,546.
So where it's blue, they do.
Right.
Where it's orange, they go to the column, the percentage of the previous blue column that did not.
Right. Oh, that's of the subset. The blue is the total.
That's right.
Got it. Thanks.
Yep.
Tom, this is Randy. I have a follow-up question. That initial 14,546 are those students who have entered any year? Like, for example, could be a freshman coming in to a 4-year program, or is it the students who have entered the licensure component? And I ask that because those would have very different interpretations in some of the EPPs.
Yeah, that's a great question. This is admission to an EPP program,
okay,
not to a university.
And so it's not specific to the licensure component of the EPP program. And let me be more specific. Oftentimes in the 4-year programs, students will enter the School of Ed as a freshman, but they're really not considered a major, for example, and taking courses towards licensure until their junior year, and they actually apply coming into their junior year. That 14,546 would include students even coming in as freshmen who have declared education as their major, even though they haven't yet applied to the licensure part of the program.
That is not my understanding, but I will defer to Dr. Baxter on that.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question? I was trying to put in the chat something about the percentages so that everybody understood what they were showing.
Yeah, so a scenario that happens in the 4-year programs is that a student may come in and declare a major as education in their freshman year, but they actually don't enter what we in our institution call the licensure component until their junior year. So in other words, they're really not engaging in the vast majority of the preparation for the program until their junior year, and they actually apply to that licensure major in their junior year. And the reason why that becomes really important is that in the freshman and sophomore year, there's a lot of movement of students, right? They've come in and said, hey, I'm interested in education, but we notice that they oftentimes switch up their majors in their first 2 years because they haven't yet entered that licensure component the last 2 years of the program. So I'm asking because that 14,546, if that includes the students who are coming in their freshman year, that's a bit of a different issue in terms of the 22% than those
that's
who have
getting
entered
at
the
just
licensure component.
that would just be getting at classic undergraduate.
Yes.
I can't decide my major. So yeah, I went through that myself. I get that. This particular thing, Dr. Pinfield, we can't observe that in the data. What we're going by is when the EPPs tell us that that person is admitted to the program.
Okay, thanks.
Does that help? So it would be, I suppose that if the EPPs were not uniformly, going with like waiting till the junior year type of thing that you were describing, that probably is a better signal. That I don't know. I believe that that's the instruction to the EPPs, but I can't verify that. Is that helpful at all?
Yeah, it is. I would encourage that if there is variability across this, that 22% that we're losing from that that first round there, if a large portion of that is attributable to the freshmen coming in and sorting out their majors, that may be something worth clarifying.
Right. The one thing that I would say is that that makes me think that the majority are probably doing more of like a junior year type of approach is that when we compare the completion years to the admission years, it's usually the completion year is usually within 2 to 3 years, 2 years usually, which might lend itself more to the junior idea. But again, we can't say for sure in the data.
Yeah, that would make sense. Yep.
Andy, this is Michael Marr.
Yeah.
Isn't this data set built off of the CSV file that's part of the IHE performance report?
It is.
So then each of these students, that 14,000 number would be, Dr. Penfield, the folks that each campus is identified as having been formally admitted to candidacy.
All right. Thanks, so Michael. Then, yeah.
It wouldn't include freshmen. It would only include those who've gone through that, whatever your campus process is.
That's a good thing. Great.
Yeah.
Great. So I appreciate this conversation. So, Dr. Seiberg, I want to make sure that this gets discussed in CACTI so that everybody's clear about what that report is capturing. It's my sense that it is pretty consistent, but we just want to make sure, to Dr. Penfield's point.
Sure.
And Dr. Tomlin, can I pose a question?
Absolutely.
Is it possible to get these data also disaggregated by race and gender so we can see how things are transpiring over time by those variables?
Well, I believe that it would be quite possible, Dr. Grant. So I think it is a component of the dashboard. So
it's not quite a component of the dashboard, but we can certainly add it. The individual components, like if you looked at each step, all of that is within the dashboard. But in terms of having a view like this, all in one shot that you could disaggregate, it would be easy to add that, and I'll put that down.
Thank you. Excellent. So, Dr. Evans, can we go to the next slide? So this is another display of the dashboard admissions from 2015 to 2021. So this has got a little more recent data. And this is just looking at the trends in admission. So overall, we can see that admissions to our EPPs are up 42% over the 2015 academic year. And then we disaggregate that by different demographics of the candidates. So you have gender there, and then you have race, ethnicity, and we can see that those numbers are up for minority candidates. And then license areas, general license areas, we can see that those numbers are up. And that difference from 2015 is statistically significant in all cases except exceptional children's services. So that is up a little bit, but it's not statistically significant. And that is, as I'll discuss a little bit in the State of the Teaching Profession report, this is an area of concern for the state. We do have a number of vacancies across the state in exceptional children's services. And so we want to point this out as an area of improvement for the state. And then the pathway, we see the traditional and the alternative, just the different pathways that folks are going through with our programs and those percentages relative to the 2015 year. Any questions on?
This is Connie. I have a quick question on the last slide.
Sure.
As it relates to the license group, is there any way that we could see that based on subject areas such as math, science, reading, social studies? Because we all know that there is a small number of individuals going into math and science, and I would just be interested in that.
So let me again refer to Dr. Baxter. I don't know if this is just a high-level display or if that's further disaggregated down to the subject area in the dashboard. Dr. Baxter.
And Ms. Locker, are you referring to the previous slide with the kind of the pipeline view or this admission slide? I missed that part.
I'm looking at the admission slide, and
okay, gotcha.
You have it listed by elementary and secondary, and I'm thinking more in the middle and secondary grades in the areas of math and science especially.
Right. Right now, that is the finest grain of disaggregation that we've got in the dashboard, but it would not be a problem to add another level down where we could kind of get at some subject area. So I'll put that on my list. A good suggestion.
Thank you.
So in the next two slides that we presented to the board, we talked some general findings around state trends. You can see here that the admissions, we have a spark line from 2015 to present, or I guess 2021. And we see admissions are up over time and relatively stable from 2020 to 2021. The completions are slightly higher, but again, we would hope that would continue to go up based on the admissions that are showing up in the coming years, that there'll be increased completions following that as sort of a latent effect. The initial employment on the bottom left is slightly down over time, but not markedly so, and retention remains relatively stable as well. On the next slide, you'll see...
Andrew, before you leave that...
Sure.
Leave that slide.
Yes, sir.
This is Van, by the way. The admissions, so we're looking at raw numbers, and admissions went from 4,400 to 6,200. The completions did not increase on the same scale, and I'm assuming completions in that slide means became certified.
They would have been identified by the EPP as program complete in the student characteristics file.
Okay. Do you know how much could we disaggregate that data to understand why the completers was relatively flat in a period of time where admissions went up 30%?
Right. Well, again, I think some of it is probably a latent effect. So if we see that that incline starts around 2019 and 2020, really 2018, and the completions would be happening, a couple years after that. So we start to see an increase here from 2020 to 2021, and my hope and expectation is that we would continue to see that increase in 22 and 23.
Great. Thanks.
Sure. Okay, on the next slide, just again, a couple more state trends to share. We ask a survey of folks that have recently completed a program, an educator preparation program, and it's called the Candidate Satisfaction Survey. It's basically asking them, how well prepared are they in a variety of components of teaching to meet the expectations of the classroom after they've been in the classroom for a year. That has remained relatively stable. Around 3/4 of folks that responded to the Candidate Satisfaction Survey agree that they were either well or very well prepared by their EPP. We also asked principals essentially a similar battery of questions about how, by comparison, how is a new teacher that recently came out of an educator preparation program, how do they compare to the average first-year teacher by their own perceptions? And that has largely remained overwhelmingly positive. I will also say that the numbers of folks who are taking these surveys due to some of the policy changes we made, I think about a year ago, have caused a dramatic increase in the participation rates. So we're getting a nice uptick on the amount of folks who are participating in these instruments. Lastly, we see teaching performance. You'll see that at the bottom left has remained relatively stable, and student growth we see as we measure using EVOS, those folks who have EVOS data, we do see an uptick since 2015 in the percentage of folks that are meeting or exceeding their student growth expectations. So that's some overall findings on the state trends. What I'd like to do next is tee up Andy Baxter, Dr. Baxter, to talk a little bit about some of the dashboarding he's been working on behind the scenes, and now that he's employed full-time with the department as opposed to operating under a grant, we're thrilled to have him here and his expertise. We'd like to share with you a couple minutes of your time to look at some of the interactiveness of this dashboarding system, as well as if you have any suggestions or ideas for additional dashboards. This is the kind of thing that can only be built upon going forward. So, Dr. Baxter, if you could share some of your thoughts about where we're headed in the coming years.
Sure. Thank you, Andrew. Kim, if you would advance to, let's see, maybe a couple slides. One more. We'll skip that. Yeah, so we have a new version that we've just launched, kind of a soft launch last week of the Educator Preparation Program dashboard. Remember, a number of you, we've had one for about a year or two, and we decided to switch our platforms and hopefully get some speed enhancements and some usability enhancements. And that is live now as of this week. And it's at the link that is down at the bottom of this slide. I'm going to take just a minute to share with you what it looks like. The home page will look a little like this. There's a card, each one of those cards, enrollment, academic background, candidate satisfaction, etc. All of those are showing kind of a state level aggregation, just as a quick glance, very similar to what Andrew was presenting a little bit earlier. But you would click on one of those, and it's going to take you to the dashboard that's dedicated to that topic. And it'll take a second for it to load. And then once it's there, you'll have a chance to disaggregate by a number of different things. So for example, like in this one, pretty much all of them, you've got a chance to disaggregate by pathway or license area, EPP type, specific EPPs, race, gender. Usually you have a chance to, choose the metric that you want to display, or if I wanted to display, the percentage change, or that kind of thing. There's usually choices about how to sort, of course. And then if you want, even more fine grain, you can click here, and you'll always be able to filter your results even more. So say I wanted to look across, all pathways, and I was really particularly interested in Black candidates for that. This would be the kind of thing, Dr. Graham, that you were alluding to earlier in that larger pipeline graph. And then you could click that, and then you're going to see, you'll get a further refining. One of the nice things about the dashboard, as opposed to showing you the slides, is the availability of getting some help to make sure that you know what's going on. And so on all of these, you're going to have a place where you can click an information icon, and this kind of fancy mouse over thing happens, and you'll be able to get some help that way, just so that you can make sure. So always take advantage of that if you can, and then use your mouse over, where I tried to do a thorough job in being able to say in English what it is you're seeing. So that's what I wanted to show you. There's a version of that for all of these. There are a few things that we want to add additionally, and as we do, we'll let you know. They will just show up as additional cards and things for you to explore. With that, I'll pass it back to Andrew.
Thank you, Dr. Baxter. And so that concluded our report to the board. The board gave permission. I think they gave permission. But essentially what happens now is that information goes over to the JLEOC to satisfy an annual report obligation. So that's a quick summary. I certainly hope that you guys leverage some of the interesting dashboard metrics we've been able to put forth. And again, in particular, I'm talking to the EPP folks that are members of this body. If you have additional asks, if you would like to see data in different ways, please let us know. Please reach out and let us know, and we'll be happy to set aside some time to talk with you about how can we improve the dashboard? How can we provide metrics that are more useful for you and your own improvement practices?
Any questions for Andrew? Okay, we'll move into the limited license update and the state of the teaching profession. I believe that's you, Dr. Tomberlin.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. So this is a report that was requested by the State Board of Education on the limited license and the issuance of limited license in the state of North Carolina, and then our progress towards clearing those licenses and converting those folks from the limited license to a CPL. So the limited license was created under statutory provision that became in effect July 1st, 2019. And so we basically have, here's the definition. A limited license is a 3-year non-renewable license issued to an individual who meets the requirements of this subdivision. And those requirements are that the person shall have completed all the requirements to hold the license except for achieving a prescribed minimum score on a standardized examination for the purposes of licensure. So that could be either the content examination, the Praxis or the Pearsons that we have for the content area, or the EdTPA, the pedagogical assessment, or the PPAT. So I'm not going to go through all this. You can read the statute if it's of interest to you. But the next slide, we have created some displays, some data displays to show what's happening with these limited licenses across the state. So the first one is the distribution of limited licenses by LEA. And here we see, next slide, please. So up in the top right corner, you see the state of North Carolina in this kind of light orange. That's the state average. So for early career teachers, that is teachers who hold some kind of initial license, either a residency license or what was lateral entry or an IPL, this is the percentage of those teachers in the state that have gone on to a limited license, and that's 1.2%. However, the graph below shows LEAs and their relative percentage of their early career teachers who hold a limited license. And you can see that varies across the state. You can see the dark orange there, that 10.1% is the highest concentration of limited licenses in any one LEA. And then there's gradations of that as we move throughout the state. This is a kind of a cumulative trend of the concentration of limited licenses. So as you can see, as we've progressed from 2017, that group of folks who were licensed in 2017, about 0.7% went on a limited license, and then in 2018, that cumulative total is increasing across years. So it does include those folks who were issued a limited license in 2017 as a percentage of the total number of initial license holders in that year. And so from 2019, we can see it's up to now to 2.1%, a cumulative total. Of course, as people convert their IPL to a CPL, they drop out of the denominator. So that's why you're seeing that kind of increased cumulative percentage across the years. So the next slide shows the conversion status. And so we've divided these up into cohorts. So the 2020 cohort actually went on a limited license sometime in the, as of July 1st. These licenses have a 3-year limit. This cohort of 50 teachers has a expiration date of their limited license as June 30th, 2022. And you can see from this chart that 86% of them have not attempted the exam that is keeping them from converting the license. An additional 12% have attempted the exam at least once, but have not met the prescribed score. And 2% or one person has actually converted the limited license into a CPL. And you can see the numbers for the other cohorts. Each of these cohorts has a successive expiration date in the following year. So in 2023, this next cohort will be up, their licenses will be expiring. And then the 2022 cohort in June 30th of 2024, their licenses will be expiring. And then we look at the effectiveness. So we have done a lot of work in the agency of looking at the relationship between pass rates on this licensure exam and teacher effectiveness. And here you can see from this distribution, we're comparing limited license holders with their initially licensed peers that are on an unrestricted license. So these are folks who are holding lateral entry licenses, or not lateral entry anymore, but residency licenses and IPLs. How do the limited license holders compare with that group? And you can see that these folks on the margins are slightly less, so a slightly higher percentage are not meeting expected growth, a smaller percentage are exceeding expected growth in their peers, but in the middle there with the meets expected growth, they're right on par. So not a lot of difference between these limited license holders and their licensed peers, their unrestricted peers. But there is some difference, especially on the marginal categories. When we looked at the school district, just kind of drilling in and what school districts will be able to see from this. And here we have the school district that we identified earlier as having the highest percentage. And you can see those percentages are displayed for them the cumulative total of the limited licenses, the conversion status of their cohorts, and the effectiveness of their cohorts. And then we do a similar one for another school district that also has a higher percentage. You can see here, just this is an example of the information that the districts will be able to see to help track their progress towards converting these licenses from a limited to a continuing professional license. Additionally, we went on to say, can we track these folks back with limited license? No, I'm sorry, go ahead to the next slide. Can we track these folks back to the EPP of origin? And that's what this display is telling us, the percentage of early career teachers with a limited license from the individual EPP. And so you can see that ranking is here. We have truncated this for the purposes of the slide. We stopped at the 1% of the early career teachers from that EPP. But every EPP is listed here in their percentage of their teachers, their early career teachers that ultimately go on to a limited license. And then this dashboard is publicly available. And here is the URL for that dashboard so that anybody can look in here. No teacher is individually identified. So I think that's what we just want this information to help guide folks and help support these folks as they leverage this limited licenses to ultimately meet the requirements to hold the CPL. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions? Hearing none, we'll move to state of the teaching profession. Dr. Tomlin.
Patrick, before we do that, I have a question that goes back to the dashboard.
Okay.
And it connects to what Tom was just talking about. I believe that we should now have roughly two cohorts of completers who would have been admitted to their program when Praxis Core was exempted because of COVID. That flexibility ended, I think, June 30th, 2021. Is that correct, Andrew or Kim?
Yeah, I think that was a 1 year part of the provision in the COVID law.
Do we have any way to identify students who would be completers who would have been exempt, who they are as a cohort relative to the broader cohort of completers, to see if there's any difference in having not taken core at all, or potentially not taking core at all, but certainly did not report a score. The score was not in play in their decision making relative to general population of people who passed core. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I think we can do that because we could identify those folks that did not take the test, or I guess didn't pass the test if they did take it as a cohort. Let me get with Dr. Baxter and Dr. Tomlin about that and see if we can work towards an analysis around there. So I think it's possible, and let me get back to you is my response to that.
Yeah, I think if we can get that analysis, it could tell us some things about core.
Yeah, so Dr. Seiberg, I think we had to report to the JLAOC on the students that were admitted under that waiver. Is that not correct?
I feel like we had to do, we had to give them a number count, but somewhere, So
if we counted them, we should be able to identify them. So I think we should be able to do that, Dr. Dempsey.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. So the last item we're covering from the State Board of Education was the presentation of the annual report on the state of the teaching profession for the 2020-2021 academic year. And just to let you folks know, just in general, we measure this report from March of 2020 to March of 2021. And so this looks at changes in staffing and attrition across the state. And so the big takeaway here, and one of the things that we were really looking at is did COVID have a substantial impact on teacher attrition from the state of North Carolina? And as you can see from the numbers here for the 2021 school year, that attrition rate was 8.20, which is, excuse me, which is up 2/3 of 1 percentage point from the prior year. And so our best recommendation is that we don't see any evidence that COVID specifically was driving this. This is what we would consider well within the normal range of fluctuation in any given year. I do, however, want to point out the mobility rate. That is substantially lower at 2.96% from 4.9%, and that is it is probable that that is related to the conditions of the pandemic. It was harder for people to move, or people thought it best not to move. And so we probably are seeing some kind of dampening effect of teacher mobility as a result of COVID, but we don't see that in the attrition rate. So this is just to show you if we looked back across the past 6 years, and think of this as what's average in the state of North Carolina and how each year performed relative to that average, you can see this 8.2 falls kind of squarely in the middle of that kind of confidence interval that we would consider within the range of average or normal, and that's what this year is yielding. Next, we look at that same thing with mobility, and you can see that's well below that range of what we would consider average. And so there was some effect, some depressing effect on mobility as a result of the pandemic, or probably, I shouldn't make that causal, that probably related to the pandemic. The next slide just puts these trends on a graph to show you the relatively small number of teachers that are leaving the profession, and the consistency of that. These are fairly low for the profession in general, as we think about, especially when we think about what happened to other industries in relation to what is being referred to as the Great Resignation. We did not see that evidence of that in the state of North Carolina for the 2021 academic year, or the measurement period. We talked. Here's an example of attrition by years of experience, and this is what we see generally. That very low mark on the zero end is a result of missingness in the years of experience, and it shouldn't be interpreted as we would just disregard that and look at that first year that's around a little under 15%. And so you can see this classic U-shaped curve to this. Attrition is higher among our early career teachers. It kind of achieves a trough in the middle of the career, and then as at the end of the career, around 30 years, we start seeing some high percentages of teachers leaving due to retirement and other factors. We display this by category. We highlight beginning teachers there because that's work that we're especially interested in as the agency is to addressing attrition with our early career teachers. And so we always keep this in mind and at our forefront of our thought of how we keep teachers in the classroom, especially in those beginning years. I'm not going to go through a lot of this. These are just the reason codes associated with this. I think this may be of less interest for our LEA partners. You should be able to have the full report. I would encourage you all to look through it and have staff look through it. This report was submitted as initial and subject to revision. So what we do is we give the month for LEAs to dig into this and see where we might have made an error, because we want this report to be as accurate as possible. So we encourage you all to look into this and make sure that you're seeing alignment with what you're reporting and what we're reporting here. And I think we can move on from this. So the vacancy rates are important. We did see, we will look at this at the first and the 40th day, and we do see on the 40th day, that's the legislative requirement, vacancy rates were at 3.4%, which is a little above what we saw in the prior year. What we don't know is what we know is that there's a pretty large influx of federal dollars in this school year, and the vacancies might be, those additional vacancies might be reflective of schools hiring more staff with those federal funds. And so that by nature would, if you increase the number of positions that you're offering, that could also increase the vacancy rate. But in general, the vacancy rate across the state was 3.4%. And then we have the breakdown of those areas. And Dr. Locklear, this is, I want to go back, next slide, please, Kim. So we have the number of vacancies by the subject areas. And so I want to point out what Dr. Locklear was addressing earlier. Science and math, you can see some relatively high numbers in those areas, both at the middle school and the high school. So that's something we're aware of. Core subjects is large, but also that represents probably the single biggest K-5 educators, elementary school educators are also the biggest group of positions in the state. And so that number, of course, would be larger than most of the others. But exceptional children also is pretty high there. So we try to keep a track of this and so that we're aware. And this should be of a special interest to EPPs as we think about what are the demands in the field. And so as you help your candidates and your EPPs kind of decide what areas they might want to go into, you have this information available to you to help direct those that may be searching. You can help direct them to these core areas that are particularly difficult to staff. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions for Dr. Tomberlin? Thank you, Dr. Evans, Dr. Tomberlin, Dr. Seiberg, and Dr. Baxter for today's updates. Next, Dr. Tomberlin will present an update on the North Carolina Pathways to Excellence for Teaching Professionals. Before Dr. Tomberlin starts, I'd like to remind everyone that this model is a starting point based off the work of our subcommittees for the last year. Please remember that subcommittees will be free to make changes and refinements to this model over the next several months. Dr. Tomberlin, you're on.
Thank you very much. And just to let you folks know, I will be presenting this in conjunction with Dr. Seiberg. So we're going to kind of hand it off. There's a lot to go through here. And even I get tired of speaking after a while. So let's, the first slide, I want to make sure we frame this discussion appropriately. This presentation will examine a more detailed layout of the proposed licensure model provided to the board last winter. We're focusing on policy implications rather than on implementation. So, questions about how would you do that? How would you roll that out? Those are not, we would ask you to kind of limit your questions surrounding that. And we're just focusing on the policy side of things. 4 PEPC subcommittees made decisions for this model. So staff was at each of those subcommittee meetings, every one of the subcommittee meetings. And so we were taking notes and about the decisions made there and about questions that were surfacing about how this all works together. And so we took that information to develop this draft model to kind of articulate how all these things could fit together, with the purpose of the subcommittees then taking this as a first approach and certainly modifying it to in any way that they see fit to make a final decision that will be brought to the State Board of Education. I want to reiterate, this is not a final model or the final model. This is an example of a model based on the subcommittee work over the past year. It is intended to promote continued development and refinement during upcoming subcommittee meetings. and is intended that we complete a final model that can be presented to the State Board of Education in the coming months.
So here we see the list of the subcommittee members, and the big takeaway here is just the variety of stakeholders that were engaged in this work over the past year. We certainly appreciate all their contributions. It was a substantial amount of time and a lot of intellectual rigor associated with this process over the past year. But I just wanted to share with you just the diversity of the group of folks that were included in the thinking behind the development to this point. And these folks will continue to do the work in the coming months as they take this initial model and continue to refine it based on their own expertise and their own perspectives. On the next slide, you'll see a basic timeline of the activity that we've been engaged in to date. Just a quick chronological history here. Back in spring of 2019, it was the Human Capital Roundtable started this work. That led ultimately to a lot of thinking over the past almost 2 years around that work. And then in February of 2021, there was a presentation to the State Board of Education, and that's where the initial work was shared. The State Board of Education then asked Pepsi to build and flesh out the initial ideas that had been developed from the roundtable. And so in March of 2021, Pepsi took that up and convened the various subcommittees that we shared with you on the previous slide. Of note here, we have more than 100 meetings have taken place since March 2021 with all the subcommittees and the various co-chairs on the careful planning and the convening of expertise from across the country and gathering a variety of artifacts and materials to help the subcommittees do their work. So a very substantial amount of time and effort has been put forth in each of these subcommittees, and many thanks to all those folks that were involved. December 2021, the department staff took the various inputs from the subcommittee recommendations thus far and drafted a proposal, as Tom mentioned just a minute ago. Then in March of 2022, we're bringing that to you all as again, just one of multiple ways this can be looked at. And the idea here is that after you all see it, we'll be handing it over to the subcommittees for additional work and refinement. It's sort of an idea of a place for them to push back where they see differences and reinforce where they feel like it's in alignment with where they would like it to be. And then ultimately, we'll present this initial model here will go to the State Board in April, and upon the conclusion of the State Board, the Pepsi subcommittee meetings and the continued refinement, we would expect a final formal recommendation in the coming months after April. So that's a quick timeline of the activity to date. We just put this slide in here to just share a little bit about framing the work as to where our current system is at and where the proposed system is going to take us. Again, the current system has a relatively stagnant career ladder. Once you arrive at the CPL. The continuing professional license, you're effectively stagnant from that point forward. There's some lack of clarity on both the entrance and the exit of the pipeline process for licensure, and this we have evidence of, and there's some research around the idea of some of the ways we do things might be negatively impacting broader diversification of the teacher pipeline. and the initial and continued promotion of folks through the journey of being a professional teacher is anchored on your tenure and how long you're in the profession, as opposed to your effectiveness. So this proposed system that we've been at work on for so long is really trying to address those critical areas. And we're going to again lay out some basic strategy around this straw man that we've built for you now in the coming slides. So let me hand it back to Tom for an overview real quick.
So here is the graphic that you've all seen before. We've updated this to reflect some of the work of the subcommittees, and you'll see here the inclusion of the apprentice teacher down on the far left, and clarifying some of the conditions under which that license operates. It is not a teacher of record. It is working under the direction of the supervision of a licensed 4 teacher. And then we also have the salaries as developed by the budget and compensation system attached to each of these license areas. Some notes for folks as you're looking through this. The issue around originally, I think when this was rolled out, we talked about content or pedagogy, and the evolution of thinking in the subcommittees was we cannot divorce content from pedagogy. So we've refined this to state that it is a demonstration of basic knowledge at license 2 of content and pedagogy, and then license 3 demonstrate intermediate level of competency in both content and pedagogy. So that or is out of this model, that we're not artificially separating these two things, that we look at the combination of these things and the depth of knowledge moving on both those things, moving from one license to another. And then I think then we'll launch right into the characteristics. Yeah.
So we're going to drill down in each of the levels in the model here. We're going to start with the apprentice teacher. Proposed salaries at the top there. This would be a State Board of Education approved license, but it wouldn't be classified. These folks would not be the teacher of record. And if the candidate does not meet the eligibility, they could reside in the classified teacher's assistant position until requirements are met. Regarding the requirements for the apprentice teacher, the thought behind this is to have at least an associate's degree, 60 credit hours towards a baccalaureate degree. The CTE folks, folks that are heading towards the CTE license areas would be required to have 3 years of relevant work experience. And in terms of the supports that need to be in place for the apprentice teacher, the supports include direct supervision of a licensed 4 or higher teacher, which we're going to get to in a little bit. There's the possibility of a support for folks might be able to qualify for the TA to teacher funding if that's applicable, and they must be served in the employer's State Board of Education approved initial teacher success program. So we're going to talk about that on the next slide. So that initial teacher success program, we're calling it the ITSP. You can think of that as a broader version of the already strong and successful over multiple years beginning teacher support program. But it's going to have to be more dynamic than the beginning teacher support program, because essentially these folks are going to be not necessarily defined as teachers in the first 3 years of licensure. Instead, this support program is going to have to help people to move all the way from the apprentice system all the way through license 3. So again, it's going to take some time, but the idea is to flesh out the beginning teacher support program and then provide alternative routes and strategies to support folks, because we're broadening the options that folks have to get through this, the variety of pathways as they work towards teacher expertise. So too, the support program will have to adjust and accommodate along the way. But that's a little bit about the initial teacher success program. And I think I'm handing it. Oh no, there's another slide here on the apprentice teacher. One thing that's yet to be decided upon is whether we should the model that includes the apprenticeship should be registered federally as a formal recognized apprenticeship. There's some dollars associated with that and some implications associated with that. So some additional investigation around whether that is a strategy that ultimately would be recommended needs to be looked at. The apprentice license is a term of 3 years. Non-completers, again, as I mentioned earlier, they can hold a classified TA position until those requirements are met. The contract would not exceed a year. This is not, I want to be clear, this is not to replace the TA positions. This is a totally new and separate additional line coming into the profession, not to replace the teaching, the TA positions. And then lastly, the licensure candidates in clinical residency under this model may qualify for the apprentice salary while they're doing their internship, because they would fall under the same qualifications and could potentially be compensated for that 16-week internship period.
Great. So here's license one. The proposed salary is $38,000. These folks, of course, would need to hold a baccalaureate degree or higher. And for this, for the purpose, we're still recognizing that they need to have some relevant content. We've established 18 hours of relevant content determined by the employer and EPP for residency license. They must be affiliated with an EPP or an employer that guides their routing. So we're not in any way recommending that folks kind of be free agents in all this to find their own way. They must work with somebody who's authorized to guide their path. Supports are in-class supervision by an advanced teacher adult leadership teacher for a minimum of 5 hours per week. And so we want to be very clear here, this is in-class supervision. So that teacher would be in the class with them, co-teaching, monitoring, whatever that looks like. But it has to be in class with that person. They are a co-teacher of record with a license for advanced teacher classroom excellence or higher on all courses. So they must observe and or co-teach with their co-teacher of record at least 1 hour per week. So we feel like this kind of ensures that this person is working with another person who also has interest in the quality of the instruction that's going on, so that these folks, there's somebody associated with them that's responsible for the outcomes for the students. Must be served in an employer's SBE ITSP. Again, we just discussed what that ITSP is in relation to beginning teachers, current beginning teacher support. Support by the sponsor as defined in the MOU between the PSU and an EPP. So whatever that relationship looks like in that MOU, that has to be provided to this licensed one person. A professional advancement account of $2,500 for the total term of the license. So the license one is a license term of 3 years in this proposal. Non-completers may hold a classified TA position in order to complete those requirements for meeting the requirements to advance to a license 2.
So moving on to the license 2 then, these folks would be the teacher of record at this level. The requirements would be obviously to hold all the license 1 requirements. They would need participation preparation sponsor, whether that be an EPP or the district that they're employed in. And here we start to see some of the broadening of the the options that a candidate has in order to continue to move through the process here. They need to complete one of the following. They either need to demonstrate competency at their level based on testing, and you'll see here the idea for the level 2 is, again, they're not where they need to be yet. So the idea would be that they if they took the praxis, that they fall within 10 points of the cut score, or the pedagogy exam, that they fall within 3 points of the cut score. If testing is not a strength of theirs and they want to pursue a different route, they could go the route of micro credentials, and that would be, those micro credentials would be a battery of micro credentials. I'm going to talk about them in a second, anchored on a strong research, and essentially it would be a suite of micro credentials that would be sort of capturing skill at the basic or foundational level of what we know to be quality teaching. Or another route is they could engage in the practical educator evidence review, which is sort of a 360 of their teaching practice, as evidenced and collected by the principal observation, the licensed 4 or higher teacher that's been assigned to support them, and student surveys. And here, the expectation would be that they need to be proficient on standards 3 and 4 of the teacher evaluation system, and that there are no not demonstrated indicators on their evaluation. And for those folks who are not totally up to speed with all the details around the standards, standard 3 and standard 4 has to do with the content that they're teaching and that they're facilitating learning for their students in this particular level. For the student surveys, the content and pedagogy skills, they would have to, the outcomes from those student surveys would have to be at the second quartile of agreement relative to their peers in that process. On the next slide here, I'm going to flesh out a couple of things. One is a little bit more about the micro-credentials, just so that everybody's using the same language here. The micro-credential is a form of certification earned by demonstrating competency. So we're allowing a route to demonstrate competency as opposed to just testing in one specific area. It's like learning by doing and demonstrating. And if you string a bunch of micro-credentials together, then that becomes a micro-endorsement, which is sort of as various stakeholders figure out what constitutes quality for basic proficiency in teaching, the micro endorsement would then capture the various micro credentials that would need to be in place in order to demonstrate that competency. And then within this concept, then, the idea is that we could create a micro endorsement at the basic level, a micro endorsement at the intermediate level, and a micro endorsement at the advanced level. So as the candidates are emerging, and again, what Tom mentioned earlier, this idea of, we've moved away from only demonstrating pedagogy at a certain level or only demonstrating content at a certain level. Instead, the subcommittees felt strongly that it's really an emergence of skill in both of those areas. So this would be essentially trying to honor that strategy and create a suite of micro-credentials that capture basic, intermediate, and advanced teaching skill as the candidate emerges through the various levels. So that's a little bit about the micro-credentials. Now I want to show you what this might look like in terms of mapping, because sometimes it's helpful to see a little visualization. What you're seeing here is, at the basic level, a micro-endorsement map. And again, the idea would be to anchor this in research-driven areas of high quality teaching. So we have those across the board. Again, this is just an example, but what you can see here is, if in this scenario, if I was at this level 2 area, essentially what could happen is, if I met this basic level of the endorsement, I would have to achieve competency in micro-credential 1, 2, and 3 related to subject matter, micro-credential 1 and 2 related to teaching diverse learners, and so on. And once I met all of those micro-credentials, then I have satisfied the micro-endorsement, and I've met the expectation expectations for this level of the teacher development. And onward we go. So we would have that same strategy for the intermediate and the advanced level. On the next slide here, some more conditions related to the requirements. Essentially, from this point forward, what the candidate needs to demonstrate is competency and development of skill in both the content and pedagogy areas. And they can do that by leveraging either testing or micro-credentials or the peer observation system that we mentioned. We're going to take a look at that in a slide in just a second, but that's basically what has to happen going forward. In order for you to move forward, you need to demonstrate competency there using any of these different routes. And again, this is a clear departure from the limited current system that is only involving testing, which we hope, and the thinking behind the various stakeholders in this journey is to allow more options and allow more flexibility so that folks don't get trapped by the limited options they have to demonstrate going forward. Regarding EVOS, a 0 or higher EVOS score, if they have an EVOS score, can substitute for either the content or the pedagogy component, but not both. So in other words, if I have demonstrated EVOS score here, I can use that and leverage that as one of my evidences to satisfy either the content or the pedagogy, but I can't do both. And I'm going to share that on a separate slide in just a second. And then for those folks who don't have an EVOS score, this model suggests a development of what we call a qualitative growth review, and it's essentially doing the same kind of thing that EVOS was doing, but from a peer perspective and colleague perspective, and that can substitute again for either the content or the pedagogy component, but not both. So let's take a second here, and Kim, can you pull up the slide we built? Because I know this is a point of potential confusion, and as we've been fleshing this out and refining it, we sensed that an opportunity to sort of provide a visual that might give you a little bit more clarity to what this looks like.
Andrew, if you don't mind, I'll do this one just to give you a little breather.
Okay, sure.
And, as Kim pulls this up. So in some internal conversations, this caused some confusion. So we want to make sure we're very clear about what we're talking about with this categorical or component strategy to fulfill the requirements. So this little table here is designed to illustrate what we mean by this. So the component is either content or pedagogy, is content and pedagogy. You need both components. The categories are the ways that you can achieve that. So you could do it by examination, you could do it by micro-credential, you could do it through the peer process, or for one of the other of those components, you could use EVOS or the qualitative growth review. What we're envisioning is this is fully flexible. You don't have to remain in one category to satisfy the components. So a candidate could choose to fulfill the content requirement by taking Praxis or Pearson, but use the peer review process to meet the pedagogical requirement. And so what this does is now, rather than having one pathway, that is examination, you could use this flexibility to create, I think we counted at least 12 possible combinations of the category for each component. So there's 12 options, ways for teachers to demonstrate their competency to hold the license, rather than just the singular one we have now. And I want to pause for a second, see if anybody has a question about what we mean by that. Great. If not, Dr. Seiberg will. Oh, Dr. Dempsey.
Dr. Dempsey, I think you're muted, sir.
Sorry, don't want to misinterpret anything. In this particular chart that you have on the screen right now, the person in license 2 or the professional in license 2 that's going to demonstrate, this is a demonstration of the content and pedagogy. The examination and they also serve as evidence of having gotten to a level of performance. So your micro-credentials would both prepare you and be an exhibition of evidence of performance. Am I interpreting that correctly?
Yeah, so that's a great question. A micro-credential could be the engagement in the micro-credential could be the preparation for demonstrating that, and then the performance on the micro-credential is the evidence. So, yeah.
Right. So, I'm attempting to phrase this in a way that is not inherently judgmental as a dean. Are courses at a university, for example, part of this in the same way micro-credentials would be part of this?
So that is a great question for the subcommittees who will be establishing these measures.
Yeah, so the chart is not exclusive at this point.
That is correct.
Thank you.
All right, I think let's return back to the presentation then, Dr. Evans and Andrew. I hope you got a sip of water and are ready to.
I did, and Dr. Dempsey, what resonated with me in that question you had in the response from Tom is, again, this is just a model, so all of this is not exclusive of anything. It's ultimately at the determination of the subcommittees that would formally propose. This is just a way of synthesizing stuff to this point, so nothing is excluded at this time. A little bit more on the licensure 2 side of things. Kim, if you could go to the next slide for me. Perfect. A little bit more on the qualitative growth review. Again, this is the alternative for folks who do not have EVOS data. The idea here would be a formal review of this emerging teacher's student learning conducted by a level 4 CE teacher. We're going to go over that level in a little bit at the beginning of a school year, and then again at the end of the school year to qualitatively assess student growth over that time. So essentially, it's a review of where kids are starting and where kids are at the conclusion of a school year, and we use that qualitative review as sort of a replacement for those subject areas that do not have an EVOS component available to them. But the idea here would be to keep that opportunity available for all educators, not just those folks that have an EVOS data point. That we provide an option for all educators to capture this and give them the same playing field going forward. On the next slide here, a couple of notes about the supports associated provided for the license 2. They must be served in an employer's SBE approved ITSP. We talked about that earlier. That's the idea of the emerging and broader support system that needs to be in place for them. Clinical supervision of a minimum of 5 hours a week by an advanced teacher, and that could include observing, co-teaching, that kind of stuff going forward for the clinical observation or clinical supervision. There has to be continued support by the sponsor, and that's defined in the memorandum of understanding between the district and the EPP. And there is also additional resources for this person to develop in terms of an account of $2,500 for the duration that they are in the license 2 level. I just muted myself accidentally. Lastly, the license 2 is a license that will last 3 years, and for those folks who don't complete in that time frame, they may hold a classified TA position until they do complete the requirements to move to license 3.
So thank you, Dr. Steinberg. I think that your explanations are going to make these last few go a lot faster. So the requirements for license 3, again, the proposed salary is $45,000 a year So you can meet the requirement through test, through micro-credentials, through the peer process, or any of these other things that we talked about. And so just some clarifications here that we up the game a little bit for these. So the test, you must meet or exceed the cut score as established by the State Board of Education. So it's not, within a range, it's actually meeting or exceeding those cuts on the content and the pedagogy exam. Micro-credentials are now at the intermediate level. The peer review, now we move to accomplished as the standards on standards 3 and 4, and no rating that is not proficient. And then for the student surveys, if folks select that route, the content and pedagogy scales need to be at the 3rd quartile of agreement. Either need to do this categorically or by component. It doesn't matter either way. 0 or higher EVOS score for two most recent years can substitute for either the content or pedagogy, and then meeting expectations for 2 years on the qualitative growth review can serve as one of the evidences. Supports must be served in the employer's ITSP. These folks still are served by that initial teacher license, initial teacher support program. Weekly peer review by level 4 or higher educator, focused on skills, demonstration of skills as articulated in their advancement and development plan. Support by the sponsor as defined in the MOU between the PSU and the EPP. And this does have a professional advancement account of $2,500 total for the term of the license. License 3 is also a term of 3 years. Non-completers may hold classified TA position in order to complete requirements for License 4.
Okay, so now we're up to License 4, and this would be the expert teacher level. The big difference between License 3 and License 4 is that they have demonstrated effectiveness 3 qualifying years within a 5-year window on the growth measure through EVOS or the qualitative growth review. And as you've seen in the development of this model, the initial stages, the initial levels of this model require the more advanced teachers to be integrated into the beginning teachers and newer teachers on the system's development. So we're going to start to see a little bit of shift in that with this License 4. Again, you're going to see in the peer observation, they need to demonstrate competency, accomplished levels for standards 2, 3, and 4. And for student surveys, the content and pedagogy scales need to be at the top quartile agreement at this point. Regarding the supports for License 4 teachers, they need to have access to micro-credentials, which could potentially allow them to pursue additional levels in the ladder and continue to develop beyond just their expert teacher level. So the idea is that if you wanted to stay at this level in perpetuity, you certainly could. But if you want to continue to develop and grow, potentially capture some additional compensation for that advancement, they need a system in place in order to develop their continued skills and growth. And so micro-credential system would be set up for that to either head towards the classroom excellence side, where they would be coaching, or the adult learning side, where they'd be working at an even broader level across the school context. Now, in addition to the supports for these License 4 folks, again, as I mentioned, they now have some obligation because they are a demonstrated expert teacher, and because of that, they have a responsibility to open their classroom to observation for some of the emerging folks within the school setting. They need to be able to conduct peer observations, again, to support some of the initial stages of folks that are earlier in the journey. So that's a new obligations. You're going to see that more and more of those as we get higher into the taxonomic structure of this model. On the next slide, you'll see the additional considerations similar to the current licensure system for the CPL. This license 4 is a term of for 5 years. There's a couple of ways of renewing the license. You could use micro credentials that are offered by the district if they meet the standards set by the state board, or traditional professional development offered by the district. And in addition to that, they need to demonstrate that effectiveness I mentioned earlier on either EVOS or the qualitative growth review for 3 out of the 5 years. The successful renewal of that licensure 4 comes with a salary increase. So every 5 years when you do this process, if you continue to demonstrating effectiveness and meeting those expectations, there's a salary increase associated with that. If you're unsuccessful in meeting those obligations for renewal, the license would be renewed, but there wouldn't be a salary increase. So there's an incentive to continue to strive for high quality and rigor in this process for the continuing teachers at level 4. If a level 4 teacher had 2 unsuccessful renewal attempts back to back, that would result in the expiration of the license. On the next slide.
Dr. Cyber, can I jump in here real quick?
Yeah, of course.
On the renewal cycle, I want to point out something to everybody so there's no confusion. So we talk about methods to renew MCs offered by the district. So I want everyone to be aware that micro-credentials in the state of North Carolina, this is still under exploration, but our best thinking right now is there's going to be 2 pathways to micro-credentials. One is a set of micro-credentials that we would leverage for the purposes of establishing licensure. And then there's micro-credentials for the purpose of professional learning that's under the purview of our LEAs and our charters, our PSUs. They direct that learning. And so we want to recognize that there are 2 separate things out there, these micro-credentials that they all have to meet the whatever standards the state board is going to set for what a micro-credential is. But some of those could be used for the purposes of a license renewal, the way we use professional learning right now. But some of them could be designated as specifically for advancement within the licensure system. So those 2 uses I wanted to be sure to point out so there's no confusion there.
Thank you, Tom, and I think I'm handing it back to you to move into the classroom teacher or teacher classroom excellence.
So we have a question here from Dr. Holland. Can you explain more info about the unsuccessful renewal attempt? So let's go back to that slide. So what we're advocating here, so what this model is setting up is that the renewal itself indicates that the teacher is maintaining effectiveness throughout that period. The professional learning is still there. Then there are requirements that they engage in professional learning. And then there's this demonstration of effectiveness 3 of the 5 years. Either that's through EVOS or this qualitative growth review that we've articulated. And that is, so having 3 out of the 5 years successfully meeting that standard of effectiveness means that the license renewal is what we would call successful. And if it's successful, it comes with that $5,000 increase in salary for the remainder of that renewal period, that 5-year renewal period. If it's unsuccessful in the first attempt, then we'll go ahead and renew the license, but you don't earn the salary increase during that 5-year renewal period. And 2 consecutive, so that I want to be clear, that's 10 years not showing effectiveness with students, at least 3 of the 5 years would result in the expiration of the license. As always, we've built into this the idea that teachers can maintain employment in education by serving in a classified TA position. And so in no way are we trying to suggest that this is absolutely terminal. But if you think about this is a teacher going through license 3, let's say they start at license 3, that's 3 years, license 4, that's 5 years, 13 years, and then another renewal, 18 years. The expectation is a teacher with 18 years of experience and all this kind of support should be able to demonstrate effectiveness in the classroom in order to maintain the license and continued effectiveness throughout their career. But of course, this is just the way we did it. All this can be modified by the subcommittees. All right, so license 4, classroom excellence. So this is the salary range. So it's a level 4 license plus a 10% premium on the for holding the position. So that would put the candidate around $61,000, $62,000 a year. Could be more depending on whether they've renewed successfully as a license 4. So they complete all the requirements for level 4. They exceeding growth on EVOS or exceeding expectations on qualitative growth review 3 out of the 5 years. You could do it through the peer review process. And again, they're distinguished on standards 2, 3, and 4. We're bringing 2 into this, establish a respectful environment for a diverse population of students. And the expectation is that they're distinguished on those 3, nothing below accomplished on any of the ratings, and student surveys for these folks would be at the top quartile of agreement in the state. Professional Learning Network supports from the PSU to identify instructional practice priorities and connect classroom excellent teachers across the district. So we would anticipate that these folks in the CE category at a district level, at least at a minimum, are interconnected and they have a network so they understand the priorities of the district in terms of the instructional program and that they are all in alignment for the goals of the district and in their improvement and what constitutes classroom excellence in that district. Obligations, they address all the state, district, and school instructional priorities, and those are aligned to standards 2, 3, and 4 within the PDP. So their professional growth has to reflect the instructional priorities of their school and/or their district and/or the state as part of their obligation. Conduct model lessons and facilitate peer reflection for instructional practice improvement. So these folks are committed to building capacity in their initially licensed teacher colleagues, and they would be called upon to conduct peer observations for the purposes of that peer review where required. At the time of L4, a license 4 renewal, the requirements for the advanced licenses are also considered. So there is the possibility that one could meet the level 4 requirements, but not meet the requirements for the advanced designation any longer. So, and that's fine. We would renew the license at the level 4 level, but then it would be indicated that they didn't meet the designation to hold the advanced position. And that would be conducted in the renewal cycle once every 5 years. At any time, the PSU has the discretion to remove a license 4 CE or license 4 adult leadership teacher as a matter of employment. This decision, however, does not have impact on the license itself. It only has impact on the employment. If they remain with the district in a non-advanced role, they would earn license 4 salary. They would not get that premium, but they could elect to move to another district and work in one of these advanced areas and reclaim that salary differential. Just again, the salary differential comes with the employment. It's not a guarantee of that salary if the person is not employed in one of those roles.
Then lastly, we have the license 4 AL or advanced teacher adult leadership position. This would be the base salary of the level 4 with a 30% premium. The requirements associated with this would be obviously to maintain the license 4 requirements, exceed growth on EVOS or the qualitative growth review we mentioned earlier, 3 out of 5 years. the practical educator evidence review, they would need to be demonstrating just a distinguished level on all the standards for NESIS, and for student surveys, they would need to be in continue to be in the top quartile of agreement. They also need to have successfully completed the micro endorsement around adult leadership, so they're adequately prepared to be effective in that role. Regarding the supports, similar to the previous level, they need a professional learning network so that they can share best practices, so that they can have a clarity from the district as to what the initiatives and priorities are, so that they can leverage their expertise in accordance with the various strategies and expectations that are going on across the district. In terms of their obligations, they must, again, as the previous level was set up, they need to address the state, district, and or school professional practice priorities. And then that's across all 5 standards within the PDP. They will provide coaching and leadership to facilitate peer reflection and instructional practice improvement. And they will collaborate with district and school leaders to address formative aspects of the North Carolina educator evaluation process. On the next slide, you'll see a couple of additional pieces of information, and they're very similar to the previous one. So at the time of the renewal for this adult leadership position, the requirements for the advanced license are also considered. So as Tom mentioned earlier, you could potentially fall out of that level and still maintain your level 4 license, but may not have met the requirements to maintain the adult leadership. But that would all be handled at the same time for the renewal process. And similar to the previous license, at any time the PSU has the discretion to remove that position as a matter of employment, but that doesn't have an impact on the license bearer. So that would allow them to operate in potentially a different school or a different district. If a position were available and they were to get hired, they could continue with that level. And the salary differential only comes at the point that they are employed in that role. If they're not in that role, they would just maintain the level 4 license and a commensurate salary associated with that. Hand it back to Tom.
So we put a lot of stuff in the appendices for you to review. We're not going to cover that necessarily. That's largely for subcommittee members to look at and see kind of these requirements laid out on a single slide. And so that's the purpose of the appendices. So Dr. Miller, we're happy to take any questions that folks might have about this presentation.
Can I ask one before we open the floor regarding micro-credentials to clarify? We've talked a lot about micro-credentials this morning, but I'm curious about the development and want to be sure that we're talking about, or that we're in agreement that teachers, LEAs, higher ed folks, the state and or vendors, whether they're nonprofit or for-profit, have the ability to develop these micro-credentials, as long as the key would be that the state board would have quality assurance standards. Would that be an accurate statement?
From my perspective, I believe that is an accurate statement. I do want to clarify in that licensure is, if we use micro-credentials for the purposes of establishing licensure, it is my understanding that they all have to, so anything we do for the purposes of establishing licensure has to be uniform across the state. So, but outside of that specific area, the development of micro-credentials and their use in things like continuing education credits, that all could be developed by anyone and submitted to the state for approval for that system under the requirements that that I presume are going to be adopted at some point by the State Board of Education.
Okay, thanks. All right, we'll open the floor.
This is Connie. Thank you, Dr. Miller. I have a couple questions. Number one, this aligns right with the last PowerPoint as you were making reference to teacher licensure or the limited license. So my question is, number one, will there be an emphasis on those LEAs with the highest percentage of limited license? That's the first question. And the second question, looking at these salaries, how will those salaries impact some of our veteran teachers, those teachers that already have national board certification? Will this be on top of that? Will this amount be on top of that master's pay, those that already have master's pay? And then when we look at some of these salaries, they're already above what your advanced level teachers are making now. So I'm just thinking about how that's going to impact teachers across the state. So that's the questions I have.
So those are great questions. Thanks. I want to preface this with saying a lot of that is implementation. So, and these align quite well with Dr. Holland's questions that are in the chat for those of you that want to take a look at her questions. As far as how this whole model interacts with other salary differentials that are currently available to teachers in the state, we've kind of steered away from that because this model does not propose using national board certification differential or master's pay to kind of fund this model. We're just presenting this model, and if those things continue to exist, we're happy that they're additive to this model, and we're in no way recommending that those things go away. But that ultimately would be up to the General Assembly to decide how they wanted to approach that. And it's certainly something for the subcommittees to consider if they want to directly articulate that those things continue to exist on top of this salary schedule. That's certainly under the purview of those subcommittees. The other question about the limited licenses, I think what you're getting at is the need for support for those folks in the current model or in a proposed model that's moving forward. We would hope, it is our hope, that offering multiple ways to demonstrate their competency to hold the license would ameliorate that problem for those districts. But I don't think we should just, in no way is the intention to suggest that these folks should just be fine with more opportunity. This model focuses a lot on identifying support for initially licensed teachers and how we can help them move through this model. And that is the responsibility of those teachers who hold a license for advanced roles. And that's how we're trying to address that situation. The third question from Dr. Holland, if an individual is unable to successfully renew, will there be some type of intervention to allow that person to get back into an active license? My personal reaction to that is yes, I would think that there should be. And in my mind, the first unsuccessful renewal attempt should be a trigger to the PSU that this is somebody that needs support. And so again, implementation is really important here. Establishing those systems of support for teachers and making sure that we're not just letting them languish, so we're sending a clear signal with that renewal that this is a teacher that needs support, needs assistance, and that could be a combination of district support. The district could potentially work with their EPP partners if that was appropriate. Certainly the state may have a role in how to support these folks, but I think I would prefer to focus on the signal of needed support in an unsuccessful renewal attempt rather than the looming kind of expiration of the license.
Hey, Tom, this is Van. If I could follow up with a point and a question. The reference in the presentation to the apprentice component, this tied, through a coincidence, have been studying the Department of Labor's regulations on this, and the apprentice ability, I did not know was a word, of the teaching profession. And I would strongly encourage, and I'm excited to see in the presentation, the connection to the federal formal definition of apprentice and how that can be part of this. So I think that's that has huge potential. And then later in the slide, two of the acronyms that have now become part of this, the Practical Educator Evidence Review and the Initial Teacher Support Program. So the ITSP and the PEER, strategies like that can help to elevate the interconnections between PSUs and EPPs and enhance and strengthen their partnerships. This is a space and an opportunity to do that. Would that be a reasonable assumption?
I think that is a reasonable assumption, and I think it's a great articulation. And I hope the co-chairs of the subcommittees heard that and are listening to that and will think about this as we move forward. I want to be very clear that this we're hoping that what we're presenting to you today is it connects those dots. That's really our goal here. Is we got a lot of feedback from the subcommittees. We can't see how these dots are connecting, and so our goal is to at a most basic level connect all those dots, so folks can then start editing. It's much easier to edit than to generate, and so we've brought out the standard model car for you, and now you tell us all the upgrades you want and what you don't want and what you want to replace, and that was our intent. So I hear what you're saying, and I hope that is being listened to by our subcommittee chairs as they start thinking about reconvening their subcommittees to start tackling this work.
Thank you, Tom.
Yeah.
This is Connie again. I'm trying to internalize what you said to me earlier, and I'm not sure I quite understood, so I'm going to ask the question again.
Okay.
Going back to the licensure piece, the limited license.
Yes, ma'am.
My question is, when you look at the map that you displayed earlier, you have some pockets like Robinson County that has the highest percentage. So with this model, will an emphasis be placed on those communities and those LEAs? And the reason I'm saying that, as a classroom teacher, a former classroom teacher, I would look to see where my weaknesses lie. And that's where my emphasis will be the focus, same as an administrator. So I'm asking you again, I guess, and maybe I just didn't quite understand what you said, so I apologize if I didn't. But will there be an emphasis on those pockets of LEAs that have the highest percentage?
So to clarify, I think what you're getting at is the limited license, the percentage of limited licenses is not the indicator that triggers support, the dedicated support that the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction provides to our TSI and CSI schools. I can't say that that's the absolute trigger, but I would imagine, and I can't verify this, but the higher levels of limited licenses are probably correlated with identification as a CSI or TSI school. So if the question is, will the state focus on supporting districts that have capacity issues in regards to effective teachers, I would have to defer to the department. I don't manage the district and school the district and school support teams, but I would imagine that the answer to that question is yes. But if Superintendent Truitt's on the line and wants to kind of address that.
Tom, can I jump in and give a thought that I have to that, to Dr. Locklear? I would say the limited license has been given to a lot of folks, and we've used it in green. And in most of those instances, those individuals have proven to be effective in the classroom, but have not been able to get beyond the tests required for licensure, the praxis. This model that we're proposing would give those individuals many more options to exit or to gain a clear license, for lack of a better term, using the other options that you saw on those menus under each of those license levels moving forward. So hopefully, by removing the barrier of only having the test to pass to clear the limited license and move into an IPL or CPL, having the many more options available would help those individuals move into a more permanent license. Was that helpful at all?
Yes, and that was my thought process also. I just wanted to emphasize that when you have these large pockets in certain districts, usually is the reason is the inability to pass the test. So I'm just thinking with that, it's just important to put emphasis on those communities, because if you have a LEA that has 0, then I'm not saying that we shouldn't highlight that LEA, but I'm thinking that you should have some emphasis on those LEAs that have the large pockets, have the capacity for this, or have the need for this licensure piece. But thank you, Dr. Miller.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, and Dr. Locklear, I just want to really put a finer point on your statement. It is always the test that is the reason for the limited license. 100% of the time. So by definition. So you're right, and I'm sorry I didn't quite answer it in that way. But yes, they would have, this model would give them multiple opportunities. The challenge is timing. As I reported out to everyone in that limited license presentation, we've got a cohort of folks of about 49 educators whose license will expire in about 3 months. This model won't help them, and we need to think, how are we going to support those folks? And then you, right behind that, you've got even larger cohorts of folks that may or may not benefit from this proposal before the termination of that limited license. So timing is of the essence here.
This is Ann. I have a few questions. Kim, would it be possible to put the original model up, please? I know it's somewhere in that PowerPoint. This is the original model or the new model?
Dr. Bullock, that would be, and I'll have to pull that up. That is separate. Okay. This has been modified to match what has been presented today. Right. Would you like me to bring up the original?
Yes, please. This is the original?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, so neither one of these And the one that Tom and Andrew presented today, EPPs were talked about maybe at license 2, I believe. But where is the EPP role in this licensure? Or is this model just talking about the state requirements for licensure beyond completing the EPP program? I think that's not clear to me when I heard this presented today. So my question is, would a candidate still have to complete an EPP program, residency or traditional, in addition to this, or not, with the model that was presented today?
I'm sorry, this is Tom. I think in the presentation, in every license area, license 1, 2, and 3, we indicate that the person must be monitored or sponsored by an EPP or the PSU. In some cases, we have currently the PSU. There are local, some PSUs are operating as their own EPPs. So we didn't want to kind of suggest in any way that was not possible. But I think for every license area, we indicate that sponsorship by an EPP is a requirement. So somebody has to be in charge of the professional, the advancement through these licenses.
But being sponsored and completing a program might mean different things to different people. And I think part of Kim, you can put up the other model now, whatever you want to put up, or take it down completely, whatever you want to do. Thank you, that was helpful. I just wanted to remember that license 3 has a little star with EPP on the top for the original model. So part of the problem, I think, today is that we're getting this for the first time. This wasn't in the agenda. This is the first time I've seen this as a committee sub-chair. So I have a ton of questions about it, right? I mean, some things on it are wonderful. I mean, all the subcommittees said we need some options for testing, right? Or no testing and that type of thing. But nowhere in the presentation was it very clear to me the role of the EPP, which I think after hearing earlier in our meeting that, traditionally prepared teachers provide the best outcomes, et cetera, et cetera. We want to be careful about our partners, right? And make sure everybody's clear that there is a role. So that's one of the things I want to point out. So I did have also a question about a license 1 around the 18 hours for content. And where that came from. I know that's a specific question. Is there a rationale of where 18 hours came from?
Dr. Bullock, my initial answer to that question is yes, but I don't want in any way to indicate that our rationale for putting that number should be the rationale of anyone else. So that number is there, and that number is a number for the subcommittees to look at and examine and grapple with and make a recommendation for whatever they feel the appropriate number is. So I'm not sure that it's necessarily productive to understand why our staff put that number in. What's more important is that what you're articulating here is the subcommittees need to look at that number and make sure that's the number they want and make that change as they see fit.
So you don't have to answer the question about 18 today, but I think it's important for subcommittees to have data. And if there's a reason that this number was chosen based on data that you see or the data that is brought up or what you see as effective teaching, I think it would be important for subcommittees to have that resource to grapple with, right? Because it could be seen as arbitrary or it could have a great valid reason, and that would be very helpful, I believe, to know that. Because it could be that, we've been living in the world of 24, right? Because of things in the federal legislation. So it would be helpful to know the data behind the rationale choice. I'm requesting that as a subcommittee chair, because that gives people somewhere to start. So that I would appreciate that information.
Absolutely. And you know, our commitment from staff to the subcommittees remains that whatever data you need to help you make decisions, we will provide those data.
Great. That would be great, because it could be a great reason and we'd be like, that's a great reason. Or it could be like, we don't agree. So whatever way it goes. And my last question, thank you for your patience today, is around the peer piece. I forgot what the title was again. And the peer piece around using the NESES instrument, kind of the building of the portfolio is what I would call it, which is which is a good pedagogical option if it's done correctly. So my question would be about, and this is a logistics question, so again, it could be a recommendation from our subcommittee, but the consistency of training around that, and who would be in charge of that if that does come to fruition, would that be put on DPI? So any of these things that we choose and come back with, would the onus of the training and the monitoring be put on DPI?
I would imagine that's a reasonable assumption. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right. That's very helpful. Thank you, Patrick.
You're welcome. Are you going to let us off the hook that easy today?
Well, I have about 6 other questions and I have about 100 texts. So I also think that since we've seen the model, I also want to say that INCACTI sent Pepsi a proposal of things that they had questions, concerns, and things that they were supporting. So I guess we need to think about how we're going to respond to that as well, because I don't think, Patrick, besides your nice, I think Olivia maybe sent an email and you sent an email, I don't think we've responded to them in a detailed way, if I'm correct. You may challenge me if I am not.
No, what we're going to do is send that to every subcommittee member so that they can read it and digest it and do what they want to with that information as they're working with refining and making changes to this sample model that you've seen today.
Great. And I'd just like to thank anyone on Wesley's, my subcommittee, that tuned in today. I know there's over 100 people that are listening to our commission meetings, so we're quite popular today in North Carolina. Thank you, Patrick.
You're quite welcome.
Tom, this is Wesley. I got a couple of questions follow up with Ian. First one is, are we looking at applying this model across the board as far as all categories, teachers, student support positions, instructional support personnel that may be paid on a teacher pay scale?
That is a great question, Dr. Wood. Thank you for raising that. No, the answer to that question is no. This is classroom teachers. If we think back to Superintendent Truitt's Polaris project, human capital is one of her focus areas. And so my understanding is this model starts to lay the foundation for how we want to look at those other areas. So in those other areas, just as you articulated, include instructional support personnel, administrators, and even classified. So the idea is that this model starts laying that foundation for the work that has to immediately follow, which is addressing those other major areas of employment in our North Carolina public schools.
Thank you for that answer. And just a couple of things I think is important for all the co-chairs to just kind of keep in the back of their mind and think about is, when I look at the model, especially license area 4 and advanced, to meet those requirements takes a lot of time and out of the classroom that I feel like for those teachers to serve level 1, level 2, and level 3 teachers. So I think it's important just to think about what is realistic for our staff to be able to do and also be effective in their current position and have somewhat of a balance of life. I know if you ask superintendents and go to visit the LEAs around our state, teachers are working extreme amount of hours fully invested. I'm just concerned that they'll be able to meet those requirements at those levels and continue on their current role. So that's something to think about there. Also, just resources at the LEA level. As I look through those slides, a lot of the I hate to say not necessarily work, but a lot of the planning, implementation, monitoring, and work seems to be put back a tremendous amount on the LEAs, especially once you get to level 4 and above, when LEAs are very short staffed now. And that's concerning to me. And then I mentioned this before, but also just in general, I know this is not in our circle of control, but state funding, when we talk about the amount of salaries for these levels, we talk about additional TA positions that may be allotted above and beyond. Right now, school systems as a whole have asked for funding for years, in addition to what we're having now, and haven't received that. So it kind of concerns me that in the event the legislation does, pass some of our recommendations, implement this, that. My question is, where is that money coming from? I know it's outside of our circle, but are we going to suffer in other areas to meet the financial requirements of this model? And I know that's outside our circle, but just something I need to share. Thanks.
Yeah, so my response to that is it's the last point in particular, Dr. Wood, is that it is not outside of our circle. That is exactly what the Budget and Compensation Committee is working on, is what is the actual ask in terms of state level appropriations to create this model. And so that work will continue as you all refine this model. They've done some great initial work on setting these salary standards, but that work will continue when we talk about the kind of, when we have a model of how this is going to work. That's going to have additional costs related to it that the budget and compensation folks will pick up to price out, and that's the arm of this work that really focuses on the funding necessary to make this a reality.
Yeah, I understand that, Tom. I just, when it comes to actually allotting the money, that comes from legislation. So that's my concern, that they won't allot what we truly need. And if they will, why haven't we got it in the past? Which that's a different conversation. But anyway, thanks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tom, and in early in the slide deck, there's a chronology, and I believe it has the sample model, that this is a sample model that's being presented to the state board, I think in March. So that's coming up. Do we, Patrick and Tom, do we have a sense of timeline moving forward? So this is going to come back to the subcommittees, and we're going to have a opportunity to work this some more. When do we have a goal for when we want to get it back?
So originally, when we started this work last year, we were hoping to have it done by now so that the legislature could consider it for the short session. However, in speaking with a couple of legislators who have sort of provided us some advice, a heavy policy lift is not well suited for a short session. So they felt like it would be more appropriate for the General Assembly to consider whatever is the final product during a long session. And the next long session is scheduled to begin in January of 2023. I may be wrong on the month, but 2023 is a long session. So that has allowed us to relax the rigidity of our timeline a little bit. So you're exactly right. Today's presentation is a sample model, and the state board will hear exactly that in April, that this is a sample model, and that the subcommittees will be given ample opportunity to make changes and to refine the model before PEPC will vote to send it to the state board for their consideration. In an ideal setting, we would like to be able to send something to the state board this summer. because it will take 2 months for them, at least if they don't send it back to Pep-C, it will take them 2 months to consider. They do a first read and then an approval, and then send it to the legislature in time for them to begin work on it in the long session. So, yes, sir. I say all that to get to yes. The subcommittee should have plenty of time to meet and make refinements to the model before any type of vote is taken.
Thank you, Patrick.
Dr. Holland, your hand is up.
Thank you, Dr. Miller. I just want to follow up on some of the questions that Wesley asked. There are several of us who serve on the budget and compensation subcommittee, and we have been working with looking at costing out this related specific to classroom teachers. But I think that it's important for everybody to recognize that Wesley's questions were not just about salaries. It was about allotments of positions and the support that's going to be needed at the district level and most likely at the department level and potentially at the EPP level to support this model. Districts are in need of additional instructional assistant positions, IA, TA, whatever you want to call them, as well as positions to support and fully implement what's needed for mental health and support of students in your student services personnel area, and to implement class size, because kids don't come in nice, neat little 1 to 16 packages. So those are several things that are going to be impacted by this, and as the cost of implementing this rises, there's not an infinite pool of money or resources to support it. So we have to keep that in mind, and the districts who are watching this and are concerned about that know where their needs are. And there's a lot that's being asked of these. So I just want to make sure that the work of budget and comp has been focused on salary specifically, primarily, but we have had conversations around what this also then means to those other groups of employees and what it means to allotments. And that if that's our work, then I'm sure that we are happy to take that on fully. But it's been more limited just specifically to costing and salaries for this to this point.
This is Tom. I would agree with that statement, Dr. Holland. And in my response to Dr. Wood, my assumption was that the issues you raised were exactly what we were talking about. So, I'm sure Dr. Graham and Dr. Fleming are listening intently to those conversations. And the reality is you were focused on the compensation levels because there wasn't really anything else formulated in terms of a plan for you to respond to. And we're anticipating that is going to change with the renewed work of the subcommittees.
Other questions or comments? Going once, going twice. All right, thank you, Dr. Tomberlin and Dr. Seiberg. We have one last agenda item, and I would like to recognize Johanna Anderson from the Belk Foundation, who has some information she would like to share regarding our work today. Johanna.
Thank you, Chairman Miller. Hello, everyone. I'm Johanna Anderson, and I serve as Executive Director of the Belk Foundation. Thank you so much for having me here today. On behalf of the Belk Foundation, I want to commend you all for the important work you are doing to elevate and strengthen the teaching profession. Access to quality public education is a core value of the Belk Foundation, and we are fully committed to supporting efforts that seek to ensure a high-quality education for all students, which we know begins with access to excellent teachers. North Carolina teachers are working harder than ever to educate students, and it is increasingly concerning that teachers lack the professional supports and opportunities they deserve. The Foundation Board and I have been closely following the recent work of Pepsi and the subcommittees you all have formed. It's admirable and challenging work to address the present and looming teacher workforce challenges that have been magnified by COVID. We were excited today to see the next iteration of ideas for system-wide change in North Carolina presented to this body. The passionate dialogue you just had reinforces both its importance, but also its complexity. While we know your plan is still very much in the works, we are supportive of its ideals and core principles, particularly your focus on prioritizing a more professional teaching experience focused on student learning. As this work proceeds, I'm confident that you, the state board, and other policymakers will put students first, and together we'll find a pathway for our shared interest in recruiting, preparing, licensing, supporting, and retaining the best educators in the country. Once your plan is submitted to the State Board of Education, it will be critical to educate stakeholders across the state about the importance of making teaching a sought-after career and how this collaboratively developed plan can make great progress in doing so. With that in mind, some of you may have heard about the Foundation's support of your work and early efforts to form a group of supporters to help move your plan from development to policy change, funding, and implementation. The Belk Foundation has provided funding to begin the planning for such a group. So far, we've heard positive feedback. Plans are underway to build a robust coalition of supporters to help build momentum and provide encouragement through what promises to be an ambitious but rewarding endeavor. The work to elevate the teaching profession is a long-term effort and will take many committed champions from multiple sectors and all corners of the state to see it through. You, your subcommittee members, the DPI team, and the state board are doing the very heavy lifting to chart a new plan for North Carolina. We want to ensure there is wind behind you to get your vision realized. At the Belk Foundation, we actively seek partners who share a commitment to elevating the teaching profession and increasing student access to excellent teachers. Having observed Pepsi meetings and the work of the subcommittees over the past year, we're encouraged that our state has a body of committed leaders to make the adjustments needed for teachers and students. Now more than ever, we need an education system that recruits the most qualified candidates into the teaching profession, commits to empowering and supporting their development as teaching professionals, and retains high caliber professionals to continue inspiring both their students and colleagues. We believe your work will be a catalyst for lasting change, and we want you to know that the Belk Foundation stands with you. Thank you again for all of your hard work. Chairman Miller?
Thank you, Johanna, for your support and the support of the Belk Foundation. It sounds like this group of supporters is in the early stages of development, and so we will be patient, but we do look forward to hearing more about this in the future. We certainly welcome any and all support as we work to move this work forward. So before I move to adjourn, anyone have any comments, questions? Hearing none, thank you, commission members, advisors, and staff for your preparation for today's discussions. I remind commission members that our next monthly meeting will be held on Thursday, April the 14th, beginning at 9 o'clock in the morning. We've completed our meeting, and unless there's additional business, I ask for a motion to adjourn.
So move, Connie.
Thank you, Connie. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second, Aaron Fleming.
Thanks, Aaron. We have a motion and a second to adjourn. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you very much.